Hello and good morning, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Grief Let's Talk About It podcast. You guys know who it is. This is Tony Lynch. I am the host of this podcast, and we are the number one podcast for bringing you stories and conversations around death, dying, and grief from some amazing people who have walked the walk and talked the talk and out here doing some amazing things. And today, I have a really amazing guest for you guys. Now, before we get started, I would like to say if you're tuning in anywhere other than YouTube, do me a favor, head on over to that YouTube channel, hit that subscribe button, hit that bell notification so you'll be notified every time that we drop a new episode. And of course, if you have any questions or comments, please put them in the comment section. We'll be sure to answer them as we go. Now, before I bring on my next guest, I would like to say that this is for educational purposes only. So without further ado, guys, help me welcome my next guest. Zach, how you doing, my friend?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing amazing. I'm doing amazing, man. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks. That was quite the epic intro music. So I'm pumped.
I started playing around with the intros and things like that. I wanted to stand out a little bit more, and so it kind of thinking outside the box. So I put together animation. So that's what you hear right there.
Oh,
like a basic countdown. So it's really cool, man. It's really cool, man. So yeah, man. Before we get started, good morning, Lincoln. Thank you for tuning in, brother. So before we get started, man, tell people who you are, about the work that you do, and where you're from.
Yeah, there's quite a bit to unpack. I know you know that already. So
Yes.
I'll keep this short and sweet, and then we can dive into everything as we talk. But my name is Zach Tidwell, and I'm a 29-year-old Marine Corps veteran, and I lost all of my sight almost 6 years ago when I shot myself in the head. I was struggling with depression, not speaking up about it, and trying to self-medicate with alcohol, and it led me down a bad path. So fast forward to now, I'm flying through the second draft of a book that dives into everything that I did wrong leading up to my suicide attempt and everything that I've done right since. In the 6 years, I'm sure we'll talk about all this, but I've wound up in a pretty incredible place and found success in some very unexpected places since losing my sight and reinventing myself. The book dives into all of that and touches on some very heavy topics. I've got my own podcast called Going In Blind with Zach Tidwell, and I create software that makes the digital world a more accessible place for everyone. And I do a lot of speaking engagements and stuff like this in hopes of saving lives and getting some of these uncomfortable conversations started in our society.
I love that, man. And myself and for everyone that has been tuning in, we're saying thank you for your service, man. And, definitely appreciate you still being here. So, let's get into it, man. Walk us through your journey.
Yeah, so I was a machine gunner in the Marines, and I deployed twice, but I didn't see combat. But my issues stemmed from a bad combination of head injuries, personal circumstances, and like I said, what really boiled down to a lack of healthy coping skills. So while I was on my second deployment, my wife at the time was having an affair. I found out from the other guy's wife and wasn't in a great spot, but came back and tried to make things work with my wife. It didn't, and I wound up filing for divorce, or I don't think I'd filed for divorce yet, but I separated from her officially in January of 2018. This deployment was in 2017. I found out near the end of 2017. And so we went our separate ways, and I was doing what I could to deal with it. No one's going to be happy in that situation, but I found that keeping myself very busy was the best way to keep my mind clear. And so I was doing everything I could to exhaust myself every day. With work as a machine gunner is strenuous, but even that, when we were in garrison, hitting the gym every night and then running and training for a half marathon that I ran shortly before I got out, and just burning the candle at both ends because then I could fall asleep at night. And one of the things that I was doing to keep myself very busy was taking my dirt bike out to the racetrack. Pretty much any weekend that I got the opportunity to do so, I was doing that. And as a result of that, things changed in March of 2018 because I was in a really bad motorcycle accident out at one of the racetracks that I would ride at. And I wound up with a traumatic brain injury from the wreck. I still don't know everything that happened that day. Basically, the entire story has been pieced in from other people, but as a byproduct of that, I spiraled. I became very agitative, very impulsive, and pretty much just a general person, or a generally miserable person to be around. I really started to struggle with depression and sleeping. And at some point, I found that, a drink or two before bed would help me fall asleep. I still wasn't staying asleep, and I would wake up sweaty in the middle of the night and thinking about everything that had happened. And so my drinking progressed. And fast forward through August of 2018, I had finished my enlistment and was honorably discharged. Got out and started going to school to become an ER nurse and working at a local hospital. And my drinking continued to progress. And I still wasn't speaking up about anything because I thought that it was weak to speak up. I had it in my mind that because I was able to excel in the Marine Corps infantry, that grit and just grinding through things that had worked in that capacity would also apply to my mental health. And I was wrong. So I'd reached a horrible place it just progressively got worse. But by the time that March of 2019 rolled around, I reached the point where I didn't want to be here anymore. And I shot myself in between the eyes. And that's what took my sight. I lost all of my hearing in one ear. I had a bunch of smaller things that came along with that. But that's kind of that initial phase of, I think, where my story really begins.
Wow. We got a question. We got a question up here. The question says, did the drinking overall intensify your depression?
Absolutely. And I didn't realize it was doing that at the time, but it is a depressant. And especially with not speaking up with things, one thing, because I've also struggled with alcoholism, even though I didn't know I was an alcoholic at that point.
Yeah.
Later on, after losing my sight, I struggled with alcoholism for about 2.5 years. And I realized that time around, and especially in getting sober, that drinking like that in times of distress really, at least for me, kind of whittled away my ability to cope with stress, because every time that there is some sort of discomfort, you're leaning for that soothing mechanism of turning your brain off. And so it absolutely was a compounding factor there.
Yeah. Wow. And you and I've talked about this because I was an alcoholic as well. And, every time I had the chance to, I was drinking. Like, I don't want to deal with this, I'm going to drink, And it was one of those things. Just like yourself, I didn't know I was an alcoholic. I didn't know I was an alcoholic until I went to sleep one night, and I realized, before I went to sleep, I went to the store, I bought a 32 pack of whatever it was I was drinking, a fifth of some sort of hard alcohol, and a liter of, or 1.75 liter of tequila, and that was my daily thing. I went to sleep for a couple hours, got up, finished that, went to work, went to the store, and they used to sell they sell those little shooters and everything, and I used to get those and go out there in 100-degree heat, digging trenches and everything, slamming on those because I was always out there by myself. And it took a very long time, it took a long time, man, to realize that I had a problem.
Yeah. I think it's that way for a lot of people, from what I've seen. And especially, it sounds like you were probably about as bad of an alcoholic as I wound up being. You're definitely like that's worse than I was before I shot myself. But after I struggled with it, after I was blind, it was mine definitely. I think I wasn't consuming as much as you, but I think my drinking was definitely worse because I was operating for 2 or 3 days just blacked out.
Oh man.
It was pretty gnarly.
Yeah, I used a few things with alcohol, alcohol and my aggressiveness, the violent nature that I was living, in the environment that I was living in was very violent. And so I used it as a way to just numb everything that I was seeing. But man, I was out there just fighting all the time, carrying on. Oh yeah, half the time I didn't even need to get into the fights, but I figured we're already here. Might as well go ahead and do it, you know.
Yeah.
And you know, it. I really, you know, the one thing that really concerned me was just the numbness, right? The attitude of I just don't care type thing. Didn't realize I was struggling with, you know, depression and, you know, all the things that came along with that, you know, just survival in its fit, in its finest form, you know. And you know, it nowadays it's like, wow, you know, it took a long time to get out of that mindset of I have to survive today, or I have to survive these moments right here, to where I had to look at life and go, you know what? No longer do I want to survive. I want to live. I want to live.
Yeah. I think I mean, it sounds like even though we were both leaning on the same crutch, our experiences were a little different, or I'd say vastly different. Definitely, like I think, but you mentioned the not caring. As I declined to that point where I did decide that I was going to kill myself, that apathy that comes with things. It wasn't necessarily, it sounds like yours was almost not caring about consequences, and mine was I couldn't find joy in anything. And then that's, you know, I talk about this a lot, but by by the time that I had shot myself, the only things that I was regularly doing was working out every morning, going to work, going to school, and then drinking at night. And
Mm.
I even all that stuff was like pulling teeth, but those were my responsibilities. And for whatever reason, I will not let myself get sloppy. I was working out when I was in the hospital and still had a bullet hole in my forehead. It was like grandma workouts that the nurses would let me do. But um, you know, I had reached the point where I knew and I recognized that apathy in myself and was still trying to force myself to go out and do things that I really enjoyed. Like snowboarding has always been a big thing for me. I know we're both in the Front Range area. And
Yes, yes.
so I would drive 2 or 3 hours up to Keystone or Breck to try and go snowboarding just to force myself out of the house. And I'd get there, still not want to be there. And then I'd sit in my truck for a couple hours before I drove home so that it looked like I went snowboarding. And I was doing the same thing with my dirt bike when the weather was nicer. I would drive to a racetrack, pay to get in, like, man, I just don't want to be here. And not, but I would sit there and pretend that I'd gone riding so that to everyone else it looked like everything was good on the outside because I was doing well in work and I was doing well in school. And it's a dangerous dance to be playing at.
It really is. We got a couple comments and a question up here for you. So Lincoln Smith asks, "What kind of coping skills do you use now for the depression?"
I'm sure we'll get into this a little bit more because I say this a lot as well. I still believe so. I shot myself on March 31st of 2019. I still believe that the worst depression I've ever been through was in early 2021, and it was several months long. And I'd reached a point where I was suicidal, but I was sober, and I didn't know why I was suicidal. Looking back, I think I was very isolated. You know, I was back out on my own at this point. It was in the middle of the lockdowns, and I was living in downtown Denver, where I didn't
Mm.
know anyone. And I think I finally started to grieve the loss of my sight, and something, you know, speaking up is something that I always preach on. And I honestly kind of beat the dead horse on it because it really has been such a cornerstone of me getting through things. Because I don't think anyone can argue that when you wake up in the hospital completely blind after having tried to kill yourself, like that is absolutely a worse spot than I was in before. But by the time that 2021 rolled around and this had happened, I realized where I was at, and I also saw where, even though I was terrified that if I did speak up and say that I was suicidal to my psychologist, that I would be pulled out of my house, taken to a hospital, and sedated until someone deemed that I was fit to be back on my own. But I saw where that was going to go because I had just shot myself 2 years earlier, and so I did speak up, and I know that's a long-winded way to get at this, but I think this is very important because this experience taught me something. This was like a key breakthrough that I still come back to today. And so when I spoke up and I told my psychologist that I was struggling, I didn't get whisked away. No one called the cops on me. She just worked with me, and we went from talking once a week to talking every day, and sometimes multiple times a day, because at times it was like, in some people say this with sobriety, sometimes you have to take it minute to minute, and sometimes it was like that at that point. It was just these thoughts that I recognized as being completely irrational, that I didn't want to be there. But that doesn't, obviously people act on those, and I've acted on those thoughts. So I recognize them. And as we talked, so over that period, one thing that she had me do consistently, it was like my homework for every day, was, and looking back on it, it's essentially meditating, but it's sitting down. And I don't know if you're familiar with what the Love Sack beanbag chairs are. It is like a man-sized beanbag chair. They're super
Yes,
comfy.
I love those things.
I have one of those, and this is still like it's still my thinking spot in my house. But I had that chair, and she told me to sit down every day, set aside the time to just sit there in the complete silence and just sit with those feelings, recognize that pain that I'm feeling and notice it, but don't try and force it away. It's almost just like analyzing it and just being with it. And in that, it would slowly start to kind of parse out things that I needed to talk to her about. And the combination of not trying to dodge those feelings, before that I had drank to dodge those feelings, or just I would try and push them away. Bringing those realizations that I'd had and sitting there and actively paying attention to them and then bringing them to our conversations would almost help me, I think, because I was voicing them aloud, be more objective in that. Because at least I've noticed when I'm dealing with depression, and when I say depression, I don't say that lightly. That's not I'm bummed out for a couple days or I'm having an awful week. I mean this crippling, heavy dread that is in you. When I deal with that, and I start to notice what is bothering me after having sat with it, when I do speak with someone about it, and it doesn't have to be my therapist, but voicing them aloud lends a more objective perspective on those things, because there's definitely a negative lens that is applied to my thoughts when I'm in those states. And I think because just like we're having a conversation right now, when we're speaking, whether it's conscious or not, you do kind of consider how whoever you're speaking to is going to receive that. For whatever reason, that has been very successful for me in dealing with these things. And it's not a quick fix, and it's not comfortable talking about it, and it sucks. But it does get easier. And that was the big thing that I learned in 2021, because it was several months of that. But I came out on the other side realizing I made it through this without going to the bottle, and I made it through this without acting on these crazy thoughts that I was having. And it can and will get better, with the caveat of you have to show up and do the work. That was the longest answer to a short question, but I think that's very important to explain all of that, because it's not a simple or a quick process. And I wanted to give context to why I say that, other than, hey, therapy helps me.
No.
Also, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, I'm also extremely active, and I think people overlook that in mental health. It doesn't matter how crappy I feel. I work out every day and also do Brazilian jiu-jitsu. I'm every day, by the time that my head hits the pillow, I'm exhausted, both physically and mentally from the stuff that I work on. I am a software developer now, writing a book. I do what I can to fill my idle time with things that challenge me and leave me feeling with that sense of, okay, I don't really have any excess energy to waste on other things at the end of the night.
Now, Before I ask my next question, I want to say good morning. We got some amazing people in the comments today. We got Lincoln Smith, Rachel Bryan, we got Tina Forward, we got my man I the Truth, Chris over here. A few other people who have been tuning in as well. I want to say thank you and good morning to you guys. Thank you guys for tuning in. We also have a couple comments in here that I'm going to read off, and then we're going to go from there. So Lincoln says, well, I want to say I'm glad it wasn't your time. It takes a lot of strength to actually attempt suicide. And his question is, so do you use the strength now to move forward? Which I think you answered that and said yes. And if you want to elaborate on that anymore. Now, here's the one question or comment right here that I think is worth unpacking. Because you and I both have been there with our suicide attempts and things like that. And the comment says, because I've known others that thought they were weak because of their attempt. And you and I both
Yeah.
know, and when we get the news that someone has unalived themselves, we listen to the comments that people say, but those who have been there in that darkness and that depression and that anxiety, when we get to a place like that, we feel as if we've tried all the other options, and we could talk ourselves into the thought and the action of wanting to unalive ourselves. And so for those out there who, I want to be careful how I say this. For those out there who think that those individuals that have done that or have attempted that are weak, I want to say, thank God you don't know what it's like to have gotten into a place like that and not knowing whether or not if you're going to climb yourself back out.
Well, and I used to think that I have suicide on both sides of my family and murder suicide on my mom's side. I had very strong opinions about this stuff until I experienced it. I had never experienced, again, I don't say depression flippantly. When I say that, I mean depression, not figuratively. I had never experienced that before, and something that I talk about, it's so one thing, it's undeniable that my alcoholism played a role in that. Even so, I had decided that I was going to shoot myself 4 days before I actually did it, and I was totally sober that day. But the night that I drank, or the night that I shot myself, I did drink. My thought was, I'm going to get a little liquid courage for this as I go through with this. And, I don't know that I would have gone through with it if I hadn't had a drink, because obviously 4 days beforehand, I didn't do it. That was kind of my test run 4 days beforehand. That was the first time I'd ever mishandled a firearm, and I held it to my head, and it was like, I've identified my way out, which is so ridiculous because all that I had really needed to do was speak up.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen that now. But another thing that I talk about is that and to speak to that a little more, is I really believe that when someone reaches that point, you're not in a sane state of mind anymore. That is an irrational thought in the first place, to think that it does feel inescapable, but especially for me to say that is ridiculous, because I've seen how much therapy has helped me and being intentional about addressing these things. But you have to stop and think about this. The coding in your genes and your instincts in your body are structured in a way that everything in your life, whether you realize it or not, kind of comes down to self-preservation and trying to spread your genes. Like, our most base animal instincts really come down to those two things: survival and sex, in the interest of spreading your genes and making them last longer. For the fact that your brain can reach a place where you think that putting an end to your genetic line is the answer to anything, I think that speaks to the insanity of that place that you're in. You're in so much pain that your judgment is clouded. And, for example, like I said, I was totally sober that night when I decided I was going to shoot myself. The day before I shot myself, I was totally sober, and my parents were at my apartment with my little sisters visiting me, and I didn't say anything to them.
Mm.
And even the night that I shot myself, I went out and talked and had a normal conversation with my roommate minutes before I had shot myself, even though I had been recording a video to my family to explain everything, because I'd never actually opened up about any of this stuff to them. I made a video. He got home early from work, so I paused the video, went out to talk to him, pretended like nothing was wrong, and then went back in my room and shot myself. That is psychotic almost. That is obviously
Yeah.
not a rational state of mind. But to bring that home with the question of feeling weak about the attempt itself, I really struggled with that for a long time, especially because I had maimed myself. I now had these irreparable and irreversible disabilities. I'm completely blind. I'm deaf in one ear. I had to have a facial reconstruction surgery. I have no sense of smell. Most of my taste is gone. And I was having to have people do everything for me. In the beginning, it was, okay, can you sit up in bed, to can you stand next to bed? And I had to relearn how to brush my teeth, and people were wiping my ass while I was in the bathroom. And having lost everything and having no independence whatsoever is what I struggled with. And I think admitting that I was at fault for that, because really everything that happened to me is entirely my fault. I'm the only one who can be held accountable for that. And I struggled with that aspect of it. But as I rebuilt my life, that's when I really started, getting more comfortable with it and owning it. And I'll stop there, because that kind of leads into more of the story, and
Right.
being a little long-winded.
No, like I said, this is your story, brother. You know what I'm saying? And this is your truth. So, right now, everybody that's in the comments, man, there's so many people speaking up. My man Chris, he's talking about it. He's like, I've attempted two times and failed both times. But now he's thankful that he did fail. And Lincoln, and he can relate to so many of this. So I want to do something with the people, with everybody that's in the comments. Speak up, please. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
Share your thoughts on this. You know what I'm saying? Give some comments. Let's ask some questions. We got the man Zach here, and he's a walking, amazing testament to everything that's going on, to understanding what it takes to speak up, and how important it is to be able to express yourself. And you got two men up here that are really just being open and vulnerable. So come on, speak on up, ask the questions, bring the comments in. We're going to put them up here, you know what I'm saying? And again, guys, you know what I'm saying, let Zach know how much you guys appreciate him being open and vulnerable and brave, to be here to share his story today as well. So now, Zach, you said a couple of things, and I want to unpack just one little section of it right now before we unpack more of your journey. Why do you think it's so hard for people to speak up? Like, I have my own thoughts and opinions on it, right? Like, there's a sense of shame when it comes down to it. Like, most of us men and most people that I know that have attempted, my first attempt, I tried to set somebody else up to kill me. It was really just that simple. I was in the gangs at the time. I was so tired, man. I was tired of everything. I was tired of the shootouts. I was tired of the fighting. I was tired, man. I was tired of not being able to sleep. And and when you live in a lifestyle like that, like truly live within it, there's a lot of things that come along with that. There's a lot of things that come along with that. And most of all, understanding that being in the gang or anything like that, in my thoughts, and again, this is just my thoughts. It's a very lonely road. You're not allowed to have people around you that care about you, because, if you was anything like me, I come after the people that loves you, and in order to get to you, right? Again, mindset over everything. Survival of the fittest. If you try to hide from me, I'll go find the people that you care about.
Yeah.
I knew better than to have people that cared about me around me, because if I'm willing to do that, I know that you're willing to do it to me too, right? So it's the loneliness that come along with that. So I remember my first attempt, I did try to take my life, but the gun jammed, so I thought that the gun didn't work. I really honestly thought the gun didn't work. So the next following day, I planned it out. I was like, oh, I know who that dude is. I know that he carries a gun. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go over here and we got about to go fisticuffs. I know as soon as I turn my back, he's going to shoot me. So everything that I had thought about was already pre planned out, and just so happened, well, it didn't happen that way. But he did. He was going to shoot me in the back, and I was ready for it. You know, I was like, come on, let's do it. Um, but it didn't happen that way. My second time, I literally planned everything out for 2.5 months. Literally, from the beginning to the end, I knew what I was going to do, how it was going to go down, and I knew one thing was for certain: I didn't want anyone to find me. Now I know there's a lot of people up there that care about me, and they really don't like me talking, or hearing about um, that I actually tried, that I actually attempted to do it and things like that. But it's the truth. This is our truth. This is I've done it, and it sucks to hear. I know, uh, but also just like Zach, I didn't know how to talk about it. I didn't know how to express how lonely and how hurt I was in this world. I talk about it now, um, but why do you think it is that most people struggle with talking about it? Is there, just
I
unpack?
just I thought it was weak, man. I was a machine gunner in the Marine Corps.
Hmm.
That takes some grit, and that is a very different environment than the one that you were in, but that is still, those are hard men, and you're trying to act hard. And there is a place for that. You need that in the infantry. But I thought that I thought that that applied to mental health stuff, and that's just not the case. There's a difference between being a pussy and struggling with depression.
Right, right,
There's a difference between falling out when you're on a 20K hike and carrying crew served machine guns on your back with everything else that you've got, and you quit. That's not, speaking up is not that. And like I said, I explained, I still think me telling my psychologist that I was suicidal again was probably the bravest thing that I've ever done, because I was terrified of what was going to happen. I thought I was going to be taken away to a hospital and locked up. And that takes a lot of courage. I think it is a I think that comes, that idea that being weak comes from having not dealt with it, because your perspectives are changed when you're stuck there.
right.
That would be my answer to that.
Okay, and I want to just add to that because I think that you're absolutely correct when it comes down to that. And being doing the work that I do now, I can only speak from the perspective of me. There was a combination of things, right? It was the not knowing how to talk with it. It was seeing the things I had saw, the homelessness, the just losing everything back to back to back to back to back.
It's just
For so many
hopelessness, man.
years. Huh?
Yeah, it's hopelessness.
Yeah, hopelessness.
Yeah,
Yes, yes. All of those different things, hopelessness. So yeah, I know there's people in here that can relate to that, and things like that, things that we don't talk about, or we have trouble articulating what's actually going on and being honest with ourselves, holding ourselves accountable for those things, right? Yeah, and but yeah, it was a combination of things, man. It was just the all around just not wanting to be here. But I noticed the last time that I attempted it back in right before COVID, and this 2019, I realized I had no fear of it. And I think for when a person gets to that point, now again, I'm only speaking from my perspective. When I got to that point, that was a very dangerous place for me because I had no fear. The first time that I attempted, I was like, I can't do it myself. You know what I'm saying? Because I really, the thought of me doing it is actually, a scary place to be. So I'm gonna have somebody else do it, and then that way they can deal with the aftermath of it. But this last time when I attempted, I realized I was empty. I had no fear at all of dying, of even doing it. They wasn't. I mean, although I thought it out, I was dead set on doing it. Period. I was like, who cares? Right? Who's going to care if another man like myself takes my life? This crap happens every day. This shit happens every day. It does with men out here. We know the statistics, man. We do. And and that's why I love doing the work that I do, because if I can keep one man and give one man hope, um, and redirect their thoughts, get them the help and the support that they need, then I'm saying, I know that that's one more man in the world, you know, that's not out there taking their lives. But
well, that's not just men, man. There's men are typically more violent in the way that they
mm-hmm.
do it, but it's everybody. It's not
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a
Yeah,
mess.
and again, when I say it, I'm only speaking from the perspective of being a man and working with men, right?
Okay.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So that's why I said, look, I'm not excluding anyone else. I'm not, you know what I'm saying? Because I know that there's women out there, there's children out there that do it. We see the news all the time,
Yeah.
and and so when I speak about it, I speak about it because of the work that I do now, working with the men and things like that. So, it's like what I see over there, it breaks my heart, especially coming from a place where it's almost a personal journey for me, right? You know what I'm saying? But don't get me wrong. Look, I've seen it all. I've seen, well, I'm not gonna say I've seen it all, but I've seen my fair share of the destruction that that is depression, hopelessness, all of those different things from all genders, from every side of it, So I never want to exclude anyone or, make it seem as if it's one sided. I'm only speaking from the side that I understand the most.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So, okay. Okay, so I the truth. He says, hope has a way of giving someone the strength mentally, emotionally. Let me put this up here so everyone can see it. Mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and physically to grind on and keep going no matter what. I totally agree. Definitely agree. So let's unpack some other things too, man. Why is it such a huge stigma for people to think about therapy?
I think it's the idea that it's weak, which again that comes back to the idea of just speaking up. It's all the same stuff. I mean, it really is. And being vulnerable is hard, but
Mm,
it will dig you out of a rut. It's not going to be easy, and you have to show up and actually commit to it. And the first three therapists that you find might not be the right fit. I've
right.
some That's also a factor that plays into it, but I mean, you have two choices there. You can either address what's bothering you and let it potentially eat at you until you get into a worse and worse spot, or you can man up and swallow your pride and accept that you need help. It's that simple. And I think reframing it that way is also I think that makes it a little more clear. Like, it takes balls to speak up.
It does. It does. You know, that phrase "man up," though. This. Um, I struggle with that phrase. Saying a little bit, but listen to how you phrased it and everything, and I understand where you're coming from. That phrase "man up," man. I've seen a lot of things. A lot of very destructive things come out of that phrase, and
Well, and me not speaking up came out of that phrase.
right,
It
right,
totally
right,
can
right.
be. Yeah, yeah.
Right. And that's what I mean. Like, I've seen the destructiveness of coming out of that phrase as well, what I'm saying? But I've also seen the other side of it where you can use it in a more positive way, right? And the reason and so I unpack it this way. That phrase "man up," I've seen destroy a lot of other men as well, because they put them in a position, as you said before, where, I got to man up, so I can't talk. I got to keep it moving.
All
I
that means, though, is do the hard thing. That's
uh-huh.
really, when you think about it, that is all that
Right.
that means.
It means do the hard thing, and I totally agree. So again, there's that multi-layered phrase that come along with it, And so when I do work with the men out there, it's just it's just one of those things. I look at it and go, man, what I'm saying? Like, what if I really wish we had another phrase for men to be able to use, that could be more subjective and open for them to go and want to um, want to go and get the help that they need and deserve.
Yeah. I don't know. I think arguing semantics on stuff like that, unless it's specifically something that, one individual that you're working with has an issue with and you change it for them. I think that's kind of a wasted effort there. I mean, if you want to get bent out of shape, I'm not saying you, I'm saying the person that you're working with. If you want to get bent out of shape out of that phrase, if there's a reasoning behind that, or if you're just being abrasive, those are two different situations. But I do,
Right.
I'd like to point out this isn't the end of the road. And I know we're getting real heavy into the negatives of this stuff, but there was a relearning process and all of that. I woke up with that bullet hole in my forehead,
Right.
and I don't think anyone would have blamed me for finishing the job at some point, and I also don't think anyone would have blamed me for not doing anything with my life. But when the first, I was in the hospital for 51 days. The first little bit that I was in there, once I understood that I was blind, because for a while I didn't. I was so messed up from the head injuries and all the medications that I was on, that I was having these very vivid hallucinations, to the point where I could have a conversation like we're having right now, and I would have this very vivid, just otherworldly setting that I was seeing from random places, and it didn't click. But at some point, they had said that I would get some sight back on my left eye when I had the surgery, the facial reconstruction surgery, and eventually it got dropped in our laps that I would be totally blind. And that's kind of when the pavement hit the road, right?
Right.
Where, okay, this is real. This isn't going away, because even I'm deaf in one ear as a result of the suicide attempt, and that wasn't even a big deal because I knew I was going to get sight back in one eye. But then I realized, my whole world had changed, and would be that way forever. But when my parents got to the hospital later that day, and we were trying to talk through, we were just like, oh, well, you can get a guide dog, and maybe you could do this, and maybe you could do that. And, oh, what about being a therapist? And my
Mm.
mind went back to the salt and pepper shakers that I saw in our chow hall on the area of base on Camp Pendleton, where I was stationed at. In really fine print, it said, the salt and pepper shaker said, made proudly by the blind and visually impaired. And I'd never interacted with a blind person before, but for whatever reason, my mind came to the first thing that I said was, I'm not making fucking salt and pepper shakers. And my parents were like, what are you talking about? And so I wound up explaining to it, but that was a cornerstone of my recovery. That was that same day that I was told I was going to be totally blind, and I decided I was going to chase my independence and do something meaningful with my life, because I'm a Marine and I've always wanted something bigger for my life, and I was going to turn this into a positive thing that could help others. And so I chased that. And 8.5 months after I pulled the trigger, I was snowboarding again in the Rocky Mountains. A month after that, I was back in college. 6 months after that, I was back out on my own. So that's the middle of 2020. That takes us through the end of 2020 into early 2021, when I mentioned that the worst period of depression that I've ever dealt with.
Right.
And kept going to school. And I don't know if I said this, I started going to school for clinical psychology at this point, because I tried finding any proof that there was a blind nurse out there somewhere, and it's not possible from a liability circumstance, and it's a very visual job. So that was the way that I was going to be able to help people. And even that changed in the middle of 2021. I'd come out of my rut, and I was in college, and again, I was living on my own at this point. I was skiing and rock climbing and whitewater kayaking, and starting to compete in Brazilian jiu-jitsu against people without any disabilities. But I hit my first math class in college, which is notoriously a hard subject for blind people just because of the visual nature and the fact that technology really isn't at a point that makes it a smooth as smooth of a process as it should be. And but my college up to that point had been, they're legally obligated to convert all my materials into formats that work with my screen reading software that I use, like the same stuff that I'm using to write my book and the same stuff that I write code with. And they weren't doing that. And that pissed me off because I was so independent at that point and had come so far. But if you sat a math assignment in front of me, I couldn't do it because other people were dropping the ball. They literally assigned another student who could see to be my eyeballs for the class. And she would read things to me. I would do the calculations on my Talking Scientific calculator. I'd communicate answers back to her after I'm typing stuff in a Word document, doing more calculations. I'd give her an answer. She'd put them in for me, and then we'd go on to the next question. It was that way for homework. It was that way for tests. And so I wound up researching what caused that and how come I could pay my bills or get an Uber with my screen reading software fine. But, if I tried getting on certain websites, I couldn't access them, or with this math homework, what's the issue there? And I found out that it all came down to the code that ran behind the scenes of every piece of software I was accessing, whether it's an app or a website, whatever it is. Developers who write that code that forms all of the on-screen elements that you can see can take specific steps to make them accessible. If they don't, then it prevents people like me or anyone using access technology, whether that's people with no arms who have to use their voice to control computers. It makes a lot of the world inaccessible to us. And knowing that, I decided, okay, this is my thing. I'm going to become part of the solution. So I dropped out of college and I started teaching myself how to code. And that was in October of 2021. That's also when the 2.5 years of alcoholism started. That's when I actually realized that I was an alcoholic, because I picked up the bottle and couldn't put it back down. But so that's October 2021. Struggling with alcoholism, still teaching myself how to code and treating it like a real-time job, or like a full-time job this entire time. And along the way, at some point, I just realized that I needed help. So I tried AA and I tried an outpatient rehab program. And then I finally swallowed my pride and went to an inpatient rehab facility. And then I was diagnosed with while I was there, with a horrible genetic disease that is incurable, and it's called Huntington's disease, and causes your brain tissue to die and will eventually degrade my behavior and my movement and my speech to the point where I become basically a vegetable. And that was a hard pill to swallow. So I leaned into the self-pity and kept drinking, but things started to shift for me. Meanwhile, this entire time I was actively trying to get sober. I wasn't being successful in it. And now I had a new excuse. But my first piece of software actually came out on the 4th of July in 2023, and things started to shift. And I've only realized this I think, identified what led to the shift in looking back on it and as I've written my book. But, this software came out. It was just a word puzzle game, but it looked and functioned normally for everyone without disabilities. Like if you had it, you would never know there was anything special to it. But that same piece of software adapted to virtually any physical disabilities. So whether someone was colorblind or totally blind or totally deaf and totally blind, or had no arms or had a spinal cord injury, everyone could use it. And it was the same app for everyone. And I wound up winning a couple awards for my work at the end of the year. And in that time in between July and the end of the year, it was being incredibly well received. And I was getting these messages from people that were benefiting from what I'd done. And I strung together my first month of sobriety, and then fell off the wagon for a little bit. And then I made it 2.5 months of sobriety, and I fell off the wagon one more time on December 5th of 2023, and I haven't looked back since. I've been sober, and I think it was like I finally had a purpose, and I had my identity back. I'd come full circle, and I'd put something positive into the world that people were benefiting from, because if you look back to everything that I've done professionally, I was a machine gunner in the Marines. When I got out, I was trying to become an ER nurse, and I was working at a hospital as a CNA helping people. Then when I started going to college, it was for to become a clinical psychologist, and all of those are service related. Those are all in service of something bigger or someone else. And I think with coding, it was like I finally found that, and I was successful in it, and it's carried me through to today in January of 2025, where I haven't had another drink and I'm in a better place and written this book. And I feel now that I am sober, this is why I actually started writing the book last year, was that I felt valid to finally share on these things, because I'd learned all these lessons, but I could only talk the talk and not walk the walk, because I was still leaning on alcohol as a crutch. And now that it's come full circle and I'm on the other side of it, I think this can save lives, because I truly believe that if I had heard someone speaking about a story like mine before I pulled the trigger, that I probably would have snapped out of that insanity that I was in, where I felt that was inescapable, and realized this motherfucker has been through all this and still come out on the other side. And he says it's because he spoke up. As simple as speaking up and showing up to do the work, even when it sucks, which it will suck when you're doing it. It's hard early on, but it does get easier, and things can get better. But I really think that I would have wound up down a very different path. And so that's the hope with all this stuff that I'm doing.
Well, I tell you what, man, you're a true inspiration, an example of overcoming. And listening to you, you made me feel as if I need to go out here and do more, And I know there's people out there is like, Tony, you always, I know, look, it's stories like this that gets that fire going under me. Like, I want to do so much more, right? You know what I'm saying? To put out into the world, man. Because having the news, going through the things that you've gone through, man, I know there's some people out there right now that's probably listening, going, man, if this guy can do it, I can do it too.
It's all perspective.
It's all perspective. Yeah.
Everyone's dealing with their stuff. Everyone has something. If you can get whoever you're talking to open up, everybody's got their shit that they're dealing with. I promise you.
Oh yeah.
I think I've dealt with more shit than most 29-year-olds, especially in a short span. But this is life, and again, you can get through it. It is doable.
Yeah, and I think it takes individuals to walk with those individuals that have been there as well. And not to make the excuses, but get to a place of accountability and vulnerability, and saying, you know what, I want so much more out of my life. But then having individuals like yourself and so many other great, amazing individuals out there to walk with them that understand the path, the struggle, right? And encouraging them to do it. Because, man, I'm telling you, if I had met, you're like David Goggins, right? You know what I'm saying? So I listen to David Goggins. I'm just like, hell yeah, man. Like, you know what I'm saying? I understand the suffer. Let's go through it. Let's get there and come out the other side. So I constantly seek the suffering of it, and because I find it to be a teacher, so to speak, for me, and like a mentor. Like, if I'm going through it, I can come out the other side. I can learn something, and I can be able to give that to someone else. But now, before I continue on, I will like to say to the people that are coming in the comments, if you come in the comments and you're trying to advertise to me or trying to solicit yourself, being disrespectful, I will block you. Okay. This is not that. This podcast is very sensitive in nature, and the conversations that we do have are meaningful. So if you're looking for a place to do those things, please do me a favor. Don't do it up here. All right. Be respectful not only of myself but of my guests, but the people who are in the comment section as well.
Appreciate some keyboard warriors right now, or what?
Yeah, you know what? I just blocked one of them. I don't understand. They all have their role to play, so to speak. But the one thing I won't tolerate is people coming in here trying to solicit sex. Right? You know what I'm saying? I'm not going to do that.
Coming in. That's what was going on?
Yeah, that's what was going on.
That sounds like a bot. Yeah.
Well, they put up their address and everything. I was like, no, we're not going to do that. You know what I'm saying? So I just block them and get them on out of there. Let's leave the conversation where it needs to be. And Lincoln and Chris, they're both over here, talking back and forth and things like that. But hopefully, it's a conversation that we have actually give some encouragement, some inspiration, some direction, but also can spark a fire under your butt to want to do better out there. And I know everyone that's in the comments very, very. I know them personally, and so for this to see them open up is a beautiful thing. So I want to say thank you for opening up the doors for this conversation. Not only did it happen between you and I, but to happen to the individuals that are watching right now, right? So yeah, you started this, you did this over here, just so you know, which is a beautiful, beautiful thing. I, I would say, man, like, thank you so much. Is there anything else that you want to dive into before we get to wrap it up? I know you got a busy day today. You got jiu-jitsu and things and going on.
Yeah, I already squeezed in my workout this morning, and I'm going to get strangled after we're done on here. But no, I think my big thing is, yeah, just, I mean, I'd like to mention my podcast and my
Yeah.
website and stuff before we're done, but that's about all I got.
Okay. Yeah, that's a given, man. That was going to be my next thing. Like, tell people how they can find you, right? You know what I'm saying? And guys, go check him out. His information is down below. But Zach, tell people how they can find you, bro.
Yeah, I'm on most places, I would say. Like Tony said, he's got the links, but the big thing to be kept up to date with the book, I have a mailing list on my website at zachtidwell.net. It's not a spam list. I've had the list for over a year and haven't sent out a single email yet. It's literally just to let people know developments with the book as I'm starting to get it published and when it comes out and stuff like that. And then you can Google me to find me everywhere else. But the other thing is Going In Blind with Zach Tidwell is the podcast. And it's all conversations with interesting people doing interesting things. I'm a very curious person, and the podcast is just me following that, whether it's researchers or people working in interesting fields or creatives or someone like me who's just been through some stuff and has some lessons to share. It's just, there's all sorts of people coming on. So it's been very exciting.
Yeah. I love that. And I'm going to be on Zach's show too. So guys, keep your eye out on that. Go and subscribe to his channel. And go to his website, check out his book when it comes out. And remember, you may be going through something. You just need to speak up. You really do. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it.
It's as simple as that.
Yep. Yeah, it's really just as simple. You need to speak up, get the support that you need. Don't make excuses. Hold yourself accountable and want something better. Because there's a lot of people that know me know that I don't do excuses. We become the change that we want to see. And the first time that you don't want to see the change that you want, you become a problem. You become a problem, and then you start to have those problems. So become the change that you want to see. Now, with that being said, Zach, I want to ask this simple question, and I do this with all my guests, and I love this question because everybody has to think about it, right? So,
all right.
If you had a superpower, what would it be?
Well, I can't see, so I feel like it would have to be vision.
I see you cheating now. See, I knew you were going to do it.
Yeah, I feel like I have to go with that one. It would make things a lot faster every day if I could see. But honestly, being blind's not that bad. I don't know. Maybe if I could control a car with my mind or something and get around, that'd be pretty helpful.
I like that. I like that because that's all outside the box. But I knew you were just going to do. I was like, you know what? I think I just set myself up for an easy answer over here.
Yeah.
But no, I definitely understand, man. I definitely understand. And for everyone that's been tuning in, do me a favor. Give Zach a huge shout out, man, for being on the show, sharing this story, being so inspirational and amazing, and in the work that he do. Go and support him. And for everyone else out there, if you have not already, do me a favor, head on over to that YouTube channel, hit that subscribe button, hit that bell notification so you'll be notified every time that we drop a new episode. Maybe this channel is not for you. So if it isn't for you, do me a favor, share it with somebody who can benefit from the conversations that we have. The podcast do serve a couple points or services. Like the people that we talk to are people who have walked the walk, talked the talk, and out here doing amazing things. That information is down there, so you have the opportunity to reach out to them. We're making it real easy to find those resources and those support out there for you. And with that being said, Zach, I want to say thank you again, brother, for coming on the show and sharing your journey. So amazing, man. And know when to tap out when you go in there to do jujitsu, okay? Just know when to tap. No more being stubborn. You know what I'm saying? And things like that. With everyone else, man, I want to say thank you for tuning in. This is going to conclude this episode of the Grief Let's Talk About It podcast. We're going to see you guys in the next episode. You guys have an amazing, blessed day, and I love you, and always thank you for your support. See you guys in the next episode. Peace.
Thanks.
You're welcome.